Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You are watching NBC News Now. It is the final countdown on COVID relief. The House making moves today that set up a final vote on the American Rescue Plan tomorrow. Lawmakers hoping to get the $1.9 trillion package signed, sealed, and delivered to the American people before unemployment benefits expire on Sunday. The president tweeting today, "We can contain this virus. We can vaccinate America. We can begin to return to our normal lives. Congress needs to pass the American Rescue Plan to get it done." Meanwhile, President Biden honoring International Women's Day with 2 executive orders, establishing the Gender Policy Council and ordering a review of Title IX rules for sexual assaults on college campuses. The president also nominating 2 female generals to 4-star command posts.
We need women and men throughout the ranks to see and celebrate women's accomplishments and leadership in the services. We need little girls and boys, both, who have grown up dreaming of serving for their country to know this is what generals in the United States Armed Forces look like. This is what Vice President.
We have team coverage from our nation's capital with NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake and NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. Garrett, we'll start with you. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi hoping for a bipartisan vote on the COVID relief bill, but no Republican in the House or Senate has backed it so far. Is there any indication that that could change?
Hope springs eternal, Allison, but I think it's very unlikely at this point. The bill that comes back over from the Senate, and we're still waiting on the sort of technical process to move it back over to the House, looks an awful lot like the bill that 2 Democrats, in fact, voted against and no Republicans voted for when it came out of the House originally. So I still think you're looking at a party line vote in the House probably tomorrow when they get this thing to the floor.
So, Mike, let me ask you, this issue came up during the press briefing today that not one single Republican has signed on to this relief bill. What's the White House saying, not just about this, but about working with Republicans on the rest of President Biden's agenda?
Well, the White House is saying that the doors of the Oval Office remain open for more bipartisan meetings. We've already seen several on a range of issues. There was, of course, though, that first meeting with just Republican senators. You'll remember at the beginning of this legislative process, Biden meeting with a group of 10 Republicans, maybe thinking if they didn't need to go down that reconciliation route, you only needed the 50 votes in order to pass it. But there weren't many changes made to the legislation, even with the Republican input that was sought there. And it looks like as Biden's moving ahead now towards his next big legislative initiative, which we expect to be focused around infrastructure, they're preparing to do just the same, move it through the reconciliation process. That means they don't need Republican support. But you know what the White House has been saying all along about this and the fact that Republicans in Congress aren't supporting this. The White House, up to the president himself, saying Republican voters across the country support this. Republican mayors, Republican governors support elements of what's in this COVID relief package. So they're continuing to redefine the idea of bipartisanship, not narrowly focused on just what it means in terms of the vote count here in Washington, Allison.
Garrett, let's talk about the filibuster. Some Democrats are pushing to get rid of it after the COVID relief talks. Here's Senator Tina Smith on MSNBC this afternoon.
There's this sort of false narrative around the filibuster that somehow if you get rid of the filibuster, that the minority doesn't have any rights, that there's not going to be a need to have bipartisan work done. And that's just not true. I mean, right now, what the filibuster does is it protects the right of a handful of people to stop all progress on the floor of the Senate and completely obstruct. And I don't think that that is going to get us where we need to get, especially right now when our country is facing so many struggles.
Garrett, other senators like Joe Manchin want to reform the filibuster instead of eliminating it. How much support does he have on that one?
Well, it was interesting this weekend. Manchin just barely cracked open the door on the filibuster. He'd been opposed, of course, to getting rid of it. Now he says he might be willing to talk about ways to reform it. I can tell you that Republican lawmakers look at any kind of reform that means you lower the threshold from 60 votes to something else as effectively getting rid of the filibuster. And they will argue they withstood pressure from their own party and from former President Trump to remove the filibuster when they were in power, and that should hold. Manchin's an interesting case here, because, as he has been on some other issues, he's the most outspoken Democrat up till this point in saying we should keep the filibuster. But I believe, we in this sort of coverage area believe there are probably other senators who feel close to as strongly as he does, who just don't get asked about it the same way. So that's a long way of saying I do think the majority, perhaps the vast majority of Democratic senators believe the filibuster has seen its last days and it's time to go. But unless all of them do, all 50, it's not happening.
Mm-hmm. Mike, what's the White House saying about the filibuster? Where does President Biden stand on it?
Well, Allison, President Biden may have moved to the White House after 36 years in the U.S. Senate, but he still thinks very much like an institutionalist in the U.S. Senate that he was there for so long. And he's argued, as when I asked him this question during the campaign, that yes, while it might serve Democrats' interests now in abolishing the filibuster to pass their agenda, he's always thought about it from the other perspective and the ways in which Democrats in the minority in the Senate used it to block Republicans from taking further action. Here's what White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said when she was asked yet again today about whether the president's changed his mind. Take a listen.
The president's preference is not to get rid of the filibuster. Look at what we've been able to accomplish in the last 6 weeks. He's on the verge of passing a historic relief bill that's going to cut child poverty in half and create 7 million jobs. He's met with members on both sides of the aisle in the Oval, and he wants to continue to work on a bipartisan basis. And we believe there are opportunities to do exactly that.
Now, for the reasons that Garrett lays out, in which Joe Manchin's comments were interesting this weekend, showing potentially some openness to reforms of the filibuster, I wouldn't be surprised if Manchin gets there that Joe Biden perhaps joins him along the way. Anything that could help them move their agenda forward on a range of issues is going to require it's not getting to 60 votes, which Republicans have made clear they're not willing to go. So I would just say, Allison, watch this space and see what happens.
Garrett, on a separate issue, Lieutenant General Russell Honore briefing lawmakers today on his review and recommendations for Capitol security. What are they saying about this report?
Well, Honore has a pretty wide scope in his changes that he recommends to keep the Capitol more safe. Everything from adding a quick reaction force of military force, essentially, who can respond quickly, to trying to change the fencing system here so that it might be more quickly adaptable to attacks, to just, frankly, finishing the hiring that needs to be done at Capitol Police. They've had hundreds of open positions for quite some time now. Members, I think, are so far listening. Capitol Police have said they'll read the report with great interest, although they think that physical security improvements, namely some kind of permanent fencing or permanent barrier, is probably more necessary here, Allison. This is not the last word on this, I think, by a long shot. I think we're probably going to see some immediate changes made to Capitol security, and then some longer-term changes could be coming down the pike, perhaps after eventually this 9/11 style commission begins or even finishes their work.
All right, Garrett Hake, Mike Memoli, thank you both.
Thanks, Allison.
You bet.
Jury selection delayed today in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. The issue, whether to reinstate a third-degree murder charge. Chauvin is the officer seen on video kneeling on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes. He was in court today facing second-degree murder and manslaughter charges. Take a look at the scene outside the courthouse today. Peaceful protesters were taking to the streets demanding justice. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins me now from outside that courthouse in Minneapolis. Shaq, we know jury selection's delayed until at least tomorrow. Tell us more about the debate today over adding third-degree murder charges.
Yeah, it was less so of a debate over whether or not to add those charges, and really a pause as they wait to hear and get more guidance from the appeals court over whether or not this trial can continue without them making a final determination on those third-degree murder charges. The judge said he's going to go through with this process of impaneling a jury until another court tells him to stop, essentially. But what you have is the state, the prosecution, saying that because Derek Chauvin and his attorneys are appealing that appellate court ruling to the state Supreme Court, they're saying, let that process play out and then let's start the trial. But again, the judge said he's moving forward. What we saw with some of the arguments and the motions that take place later in the afternoon, we saw an agreement to strike about 16 of the first 50 jurors. So while we haven't gotten to the questioning of the jurors that will start tomorrow and that's scheduled to start tomorrow, we have both sides, the prosecution and the defense, striking some of those jurors based on a jury questionnaire that went out. So we're having progress. The official juror questioning will start tomorrow, but there was somewhat of a delay, a pause, as they're still haggling over what to do with that third-degree murder charge.
So I know this is the next step, but once we get to jury selection, Shaq, how long do you expect that will take? And do you have any sense of when we might start hearing opening arguments in this case?
Yeah, you know, this is something that could take up to 3 weeks. That's how long the judge has scheduled for the jury selection process. I mean, you get a sense of what we learned earlier this afternoon in the sense that 50 of those jurors have already been removed, or excuse me, 16 of the first 50 jurors have already been removed from this process, and that's based on the questionnaire. That's before they even had questions or conversations with these people. So you're going to go through this process pretty slowly. You're going to see both sides question each individual potential juror, and if they agree on them, then that juror will be paneled. You have to go through this process until you get to a jury of 12 people and 4 alternates. So it could take some time. Bottom line, opening arguments start on March 29th, and then that's a process that the judge is signaling could take 2 to 4 weeks before we even get to the point where we're waiting for a verdict.
Shaq, according to the Washington Post, there are 2,000 National Guard members in Minneapolis and at least 1,100 law enforcement officers. How are protesters reacting to today's delay? And what's the situation around the courthouse right now? As we've been talking to you today, we can, of course, see the fencing that's up there now behind you.
That's right, Allison. And, you know, the Minnesota National Guard, they actually clarified. They said they have about 2,000 that are activated or that are on standby, ready to be activated. Right now, protecting the courthouse, they have about 100 National Guard members here. But this is all part of what the city calls Operation Safety Net. You see the fencing behind me. At certain areas, you see barbed wire. There's concrete barriers all throughout. There's definitely a heightened sense of security all throughout the downtown area. But you also saw earlier today some demonstrations that were peaceful. They started in front of the courthouse. There was a march around the downtown area. I want you to listen to a little bit of some of the conversations I've been having with some of these demonstrators, not only today, but over really the course of the weekend.
Things went peacefully. Nobody got out of hand. Everybody's listening. I mean, it's only day one. I mean, hopefully our voices got out here and was heard. We're out here. We're angry. We're pissed off, and we just want justice. We want justice not just for George Floyd. We want justice for Breonna Taylor. We want justice for all the slain African Americans that were killed on police hands.
Many of the protesters that have come out and tried to set up their voice as this trial starts.
All right, Shaq Brewster in Minneapolis, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Joining me now, former federal prosecutor and NBC News legal analyst Cynthia Oxney. Cynthia, great to have you on. Let's talk here legally. What is the difference between second and third degree murder charges in this case? And do you think the prosecution should pursue additional charges? How could it affect their ability to prove their case here?
Well, I think the third degree murder charge is really important. The second degree charge in this case is really interesting. It's a felony murder charge. It's not the kind of second degree charge most people are used to, where you have to intentionally cause the harm. It's actually saying what happened was you were a substantial factor, in the death of George Floyd. And that you did that in the process of committing the third degree assault. It's a felony murder charge. It's very different than a regular second degree murder charge. Also charged with manslaughter in the second degree, which is a gross negligence standard, and murder in the third degree here, which is a depraved heart murder, that he caused the death of George Floyd while doing something with a depraved heart, a reckless indifference to human life. It does seem like the third degree murder fits pretty well. It's important for the prosecution to have this charge reinstated. And I would agree with the prosecution that they should do everything in their power not to go forward until this third degree murder charge is reinstated. It's important for the jury to have options, and the third degree murder charge is a very strong option.
Cynthia, we expect cell phone video of the killing and the 2 autopsy reports to play key roles in this trial. How do you expect prosecutors to use that evidence?
Well, I know we've all seen it, but it almost makes you cry to watch it. It'll be very emotional to see that video again. And I would expect that the prosecutors, they will put on the person who took the video, and they will explain what they saw, and then they will use that person to, what we would say, prove up the video to show that it's authentic and it's the video that they took. It will be emotional. They will go over it frame by frame by frame to show that George Floyd was not a threat, minute by, second by second by second, as Chauvin just continued to put his knee on him. And they will contextualize it. So as he had his knee on him, as George Floyd was not moving, people in the crowd were screaming out, "You're killing him. He's bleeding from his nose. He's not a threat." And they will keep going over that video and bring other people who saw the event to say, "Yes, I screamed here. I knew he was dying. I knew it was unreasonable. I knew that Floyd was not a threat," because that's really the crux of the case. If Floyd was a threat, he was allowed to use force. If Floyd wasn't, he was not allowed to. So they will use that video over and over and over again, as they should.
Cynthia, listen, I am certainly no legal expert, but I think I speak for many of our viewers when I say watching that video, I can't possibly imagine how you would argue in favor of Derek Chauvin. How would you defend him in a situation like this? What should the defense argue here?
My guess is they argue something to the effect of, the officer is going to say, "I thought he was a threat. He had drugs in his system. Maybe he seems stronger to me. You weren't there. You didn't feel how he was struggling against me. The video doesn't completely show what a threat he was. He may have there may also be a defense that actually he had a heart condition." I mean, there will be, based on that other autopsy, that will be the defense. And the question is, will the jurors be able to not listen to all the outside noise, not think about the outside pressures in the case and the National Guard on the outside and the stakes for the city of Minneapolis, and really focus on what the evidence is that they hear and the instructions from the judge? My experience is pretty good that jurors will do everything in their power to really do their duty. And I hope they do so here.
What a tough job they have. And once they're selected, we certainly thank them for doing it. Cynthia, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Former Minneapolis cop Derek Chauvin accused of using excessive force even before George Floyd's death. NBCNews.com reporter Janelle Griffith has more.
Multiple people who had run-ins with Derek Chauvin before his deadly encounter with George Floyd have publicly accused him of kneeling on top of them or choking them. I spoke to two of them, both of whom said that they filed formal complaints that were dismissed and not taken seriously.
He picked me out of everybody and told me I had to go because they were going to close. And I was like, wait a minute, but I had my jacket checked into like a coat check, and I had my ticket, and I'm showing him my ticket the whole time he's telling me I gotta go. I'm like, dude, let me go get my jacket at least. It's wintertime, He wouldn't let me.
That's Julian Hernandez. He encountered Chauvin in February 2015 at the El Nuevo Rodeo nightclub, where Chauvin worked as an off-duty security officer for almost 17 years. Hernandez was at the club to see a band with 20 or so of his coworkers. He said that he had been drinking and went to the bar to try to buy cigarettes, but that they were too expensive, and that as he walked away from the bar, he heard someone say, "It's time to go." He turned around and encountered Chauvin, who he said forced him to an exit.
We ended up outside, and that's when things got a little physical. He tried to grab me from my neck, and of course I reacted. And then after that, he choked me out on the ground. It was bad. It was a bad experience.
Hernandez's account will not be admissible in Chauvin's trial. Prosecutors had sought to introduce several arrests involving Chauvin dating as far back as 2014, including Hernandez's, alleging that they showed a pattern of excessive force. But a judge denied most of those requests. Jurors may hear about one of those cases, the arrest of Zoya Code in 2017. She is listed as a prospective witness for the state in Chauvin's trial. Chauvin responded to a call of a domestic dispute at her home in June 2017. Prosecutors said she pulled away from him as he tried to arrest her. Then they said he pulled her to the ground in the prone position and he knelt on her. According to prosecutors, Chauvin told his partner to restrain her ankles even though she wasn't resisting. Chauvin's attorney, Eric Nelson, did not return requests for comment, but in a court filing, he said that Chauvin acted appropriately during those arrests. With regard to Hernandez's arrest, he said in the court filing, under the Minneapolis Police Department use of force policy in effect at the time, a neck restraint could be used against a subject who is actively resisting. Hernandez, whose charges were ultimately dismissed, said he believes that if Chauvin's superiors had taken complaints against him more seriously and reprimanded him, Chauvin would still be a cop and George Floyd would still be alive.
He wouldn't be in the situation that he's in now if he would have took the proper steps to correct himself. I don't think he would have never done what he did to George Floyd if they would have made him take some kind of anger classes or something,
All right, let's go to NBC News Now. Correspondent Simone Boyce. She has the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Hey, Simone.
Hey, Allison, we start with some news about Governor Andrew Cuomo. New York Attorney General Letitia James announcing today that former acting U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, June H. Kim, and employment discrimination attorney Ann L. Clark are the two attorneys who will lead the independent investigation into the sexual harassment allegations against New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. James says, quote, "We are committed to an independent and thorough investigation of the facts." Well, over in Ukraine, thousands of women in Kiev marching on International Women's Day to highlight the rise in domestic violence in the country. Violence against women has spiked during the pandemic. That's what the activists are saying today as they're marching. And in Missouri, a pastor at the First General Baptist Church is on leave after a video of him went viral where he preached that wives should be made up and well-dressed for their husbands because, quote, "God made men to be drawn to beautiful women." The church ministry said that the pastor is now seeking professional counseling. And down in Houston, local officials are sounding the alarm and blasting a nightclub's plans to have a mask-off party on Wednesday in celebration of Texas lifting its statewide mask mandate. Now, of course, leaders are worrying that a maskless indoor party will lead to another spike in coronavirus cases. And Mackenzie Scott, the philanthropist and former wife of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, just got married to a Seattle science teacher. Her new husband, Dan Jewett, announced that they look forward to giving away much of their wealth to charity. Ending headlines today on a nice note, Allison, I'll send it back to you.
Yeah, appreciate hearing about love. That's great, Simone. Thank you so much. Spring break kicking off for hundreds of colleges this month. Pandemic or not, some popular tourist destinations are already seeing a spike in visitors, raising new concerns about whether fun in the sun could further spread COVID. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock is in Miami.
Allison, good afternoon from Miami Beach. Over my shoulder here is a bit of a mirage with those empty pockets of sand because it's largely been overcast and blustery all day. But make no mistake about it, this beach has been slammed with spring breakers. City officials here in Miami Beach telling me that they might see 200,000 visitors a day during normal times. And what we saw over the weekend here absolutely looked pre-pandemic. And it's not just places like this that are seeing crowds crop up. Perfect blue skies and aqua-colored water are pulling waves of people to Miami Beach over spring break.
Honestly, everyone's almost piled up on top of each other here.
Causing concern, months of progress on COVID could be undone, even as some visitors distinguish between risky behavior and relaxation.
You're not really breathing someone else's air. If you go to a restaurant, let's be honest, you're on top of everybody.
Up the coast, Bike Week at Daytona Beach is expected to drive around 400,000 people to the city, as mutant strains like the UK variant, so plentiful in Florida, could find new homes.
Do people need to understand they can come here and then go home and essentially export these variants or virus to their own communities?
You have to be concerned about furthering the spread of these variants by people coming to Florida and not taking those precautions.
Sunday night's NBA All-Star Game in Atlanta, pushing crowds to pack clubs for special events not sanctioned by the league. While a college party near the University of Colorado Boulder attracted hundreds of unmasked students before a SWAT team broke things up.
You are ordered to leave the area.
It all comes as the debate over masking fires up. In Boise, Idaho, where face coverings are required, more than 100 people burned theirs in protest, even children getting involved.
Destroy them!
Divisions on display as more states loosen their restrictions. Arizona joining Mississippi and Texas removing capacity limits on restaurants, gyms, and theaters. And after a year in the dark, New York City movie theaters are printing tickets once again.
I feel excited and happy and glad.
The nation reopening as the race is still on for vaccinations. Back in Florida, blocks of people just hoping for a dose after a FEMA-run site was falsely flagged for offering the vaccine to all comers. Unlike states like Texas and Mississippi that recently removed their mask mandates, Florida has not had a statewide mandate since the pandemic started. But despite that, despite the fact that restaurants here have been open or allowed to be at 100% since September, the per capita cases in New York, California, and Florida are all about the same. One of the big concerns right now, though, is variants, and specifically the UK variant that is so plentiful in Florida, leads the country in number of cases. Health experts right now are concerned that it could be exported from people who are visiting here to other states, other communities, and it could be seeded there. That's the latest here in Miami Beach. Sam Brock, NBC News. Allison, back to you.
More students in their classrooms today for the first time in nearly a year. Chicago and Philadelphia using a hybrid model to bring students back after some tense negotiations between the districts and their teachers. NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett is in Chicago with more.
Allison, here in Chicago, about 20,000 middle schoolers returning to school today. Over in Philadelphia, about 3,000 students in kindergarten, first and second grade using this hybrid model, which means that they're only in person for a few days a week and then they're continuing their remote learning situation. Obviously, in both cities, we've seen some contentious arguments between the teachers unions and the public schools over safety measures and vaccinations being available to teachers. Now, obviously, President Biden saying he's prioritizing vaccinations for teachers, which is a good sign, especially as parents are looking to get more of their students back into schools. I spoke with Daisy Gamboa. We met here at the middle school this morning. Her son is an 8th grader, and while she's ecstatic that he's able to get back in person because she was concerned about his drive going to school, she's still uncertain about the question marks moving forward because he's supposed to start high school next year, but there are no current plans for high school students here in Chicago. Take a listen to a bit of our conversation.
I'm happy for hybrid. I'm happy that, that I finally have an option and my son can attend in person 2 days a week, but it's not enough. I want us all to get back to 5 days a week in a safe building, having students in our community being safe, learning with their teachers, with their school, being around their school staff, being around their school's leadership, around their classmates, and just being there learning in person.
Leading up to this reopening, Daisy said that she expressed some frustration with the Chicago Teachers Union because she wanted to be an advocate for her child getting people and their students back into school in person. The Chicago Teachers Union noting to me that they're really concerned with this phased reopening plan because they're not getting enough access to data about the vaccinations that are available to teachers, and they're concerned about the fact that this is a hybrid model and the lack of equity actually that is present in the fact that some students are in person and some are still at home, especially in some of the more vulnerable neighborhoods around Chicago where parents don't feel comfortable sending their students back into schools. Now, that said, parents I've also spoken to said that they're willing to do anything. They're willing to step up to help out, to help bring their students back to school. One of the holes they're looking to fill is about 2,000 positions in the district across the city, positions that are still unfilled. Take a listen to Ryan Griffin and efforts that he says parents are working towards to help the schools out.
We have a lot of parents who've had to leave their jobs to care for their kids at home and be home teachers' aides. And we're promoting our parents to apply for those positions if they're open in your local school. If that helps us move the needle to get more, substantive in-person learning done, I think parents have always been a group that are willing to do work at the school level. And now there's open positions that don't require teacher accreditation to help out.
So these are parents that were either stay-at-home parents or left their jobs or got laid off during the pandemic that are now saying, hey, I'll come and work at the school. I'll help with pickup and drop off, the traffic flow, overseeing classrooms, these jobs that the Chicago Public Schools need to fill in order to fully operate the school system. A lot of parents enthusiastic about this, but they say they need a firmer plan from the schools for even the rest of the semester here this spring and looking forward to next fall. Ryan saying it could be devastating for the city if there isn't a firm plan to help their students and children feel safe in person, learning full time. Allison.
You got your COVID-19 vaccine, so now what? The CDC releasing new guidance for the 30 million Americans who are fully vaccinated so far. Joining me now, Dr. Kavita Patel, NBC News medical contributor and former Obama White House health policy director. Dr. Patel, a takeaway from this guidance that a lot of people are excited about. Fully vaccinated grandparents can visit their unvaccinated grandkids. What else can fully vaccinated people do?
Yeah, Allison, it's great news. And fully vaccinated people, and as a reminder, that's 2 weeks past your second dose or 2 weeks past your first and only dose if it's a one-dose vaccine. That means fully vaccinated. You can get together with people outside your household and family who are also fully vaccinated in a small gathering, indoors, without a mask, without a distance. I'm a doctor. I recommend you keep washing your hands, but no mask makes a big difference to have people get together and have social events, be able to hug, be able to touch each other. And that's probably the best news as a incentive to go and get that vaccine as soon as it's offered to you.
For sure. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky says fully vaccinated people should still avoid travel. Here she is at today's briefing.
Every time that there's a surge in travel, we have a surge in cases in this country. We are really trying to restrain travel at this current period of time, and we're hopeful that our next set of guidance will have more science around what vaccinated people can do.
But we know people are traveling more. The numbers from the TSA show that even though infection rates are still high in our country, what kind of guidance would you like to see here on traveling? And if our viewers do need to travel, they have somewhere they need to be, what should they be doing?
Yeah, Allison, let me do that last question first. If people are traveling, treat everyone you come into contact with as if they might have COVID. It just gives you a little bit more heightened awareness. The more people you come into contact with, the more chances you have of getting or potentially giving the virus. Even if you're fully vaccinated, the preliminary data, and this was in the CDC briefing, shows that you are much lower likely to kind of give the virus to someone else, but we don't want to take any chances. And then to your first part of the question, what we really need to look at is where you're traveling from and where you're going to, Allison, in terms of the rates of transmission and the positivity rate. If you're still seeing high rates of the virus, over 5% of tests are positive, for example, then you're going into an area, unfortunately, like Florida, where you still have a high chance of going into something and having somebody get exposed to COVID. So that's the type of example of how to be mindful as we're heading into spring and Easter breaks.
Dr. Patel, another big takeaway from these new CDC guidelines, fully vaccinated people who are exposed to COVID do not need to quarantine or get tested as long as they're asymptomatic. We know that none of our vaccines is 100% effective. So can you explain the thinking here and what people should be doing?
Yeah, what the CDC is really trying to do is identify a pathway towards normalcy that involves lower risk, Allison. I think they're doing a pretty great job acknowledging, to your point, there is no such thing as zero risk. For example, I can get in a car and still get in an accident. I accept that risk by trying to drive as safely and wearing a seatbelt. By putting out guidance that a fully vaccinated person does not need to quarantine for 14 days if they come into contact, that's an acknowledgement to say that you are very low risk of getting the virus and getting the disease if you are exposed to someone. Not zero, but you're very low risk. And honestly, Allison, this is the kind of real world guidance we need. We need to have this because let's be honest, we're not going to have a zero scenario. We're not going to have a scenario where you, Allison, can have no chance of ever doing anything. So we need these kind of, I would call them more real world examples. And I'm looking forward, as more and more Americans are vaccinated, we will see more examples like this in the near future.
Oh, we are all looking forward to it. Some good news today, Dr. Patel. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
No question, off limits. Oprah asking Meghan and Prince Harry about several rumors splattered across the British tabloids, including one infamous headline accusing Meghan of making Kate Middleton cry. Here are some of the major bombshells from last night's conversation.
A few days before the wedding, she was upset about something pertaining to, yes, the issue was correct, about flower girl dresses, and it made me cry.
This was a really big story at the time that you made Kate cry. Now you're saying you didn't make Kate cry, Kate made you cry. So we all want to know what would make you cry. What were you going through? You were going through all of the anxiety that brides go through putting their wedding together, and going through all of the issues with your father. Was he coming? Was he not coming? And there was a confrontation over the dresses.
It wasn't a confrontation, and I actually think I don't think it's fair to her to get into the details of that, because she apologized, and I've forgiven her, right? What was hard to get over was being blamed for something that not only I didn't do, but that happened to me. My understanding and my experience of the past 4 years is it's nothing like what it looks like. It's nothing like what it looks like. And I remember so often people within the firm would say, well, you can't do this because it'll look like that. You can't, so even, can I go and have lunch with my friends? No, you're oversaturated, you're everywhere. It would be best for you to not go out to lunch with your friends. I go, well, I haven't left the house in months.
I never thought that I would have my security removed, because I was born into this position and I inherited the risk. So that was a shock to me. That was what completely changed the whole plan.
So
not that we had a plan.
You, as Prince Harry, are going to have your security removed.
Yeah, and I even wrote letters to his family saying, please, it's very clear the protection of me or Archie is not a priority. I accept that. That is fine. Please keep my husband safe. I see the death threats. I see the racist propaganda. Please keep him safe. Please don't pull his security and announce to the world when he and we are most vulnerable. And they said it's just not possible.
So when I asked the question, why did you leave? The simplest answer is
lack of support and lack of understanding.
So I want clarity. Was the move about getting away from the UK press, because the press, is, you know, is everywhere, or was the move because you weren't getting enough support from the firm?
It was both.
Both?
Yeah.
Did you blindside the Queen?
No. I've never blindsided my grandmother. I have too much respect for her.
So where did that story come from?
I hazard a guess that it probably could have come from within the institution.
All right, let's bring in NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley. Matt, Meghan and Harry didn't exactly paint the most flattering picture of the royal family. Here's how some people in London are reacting.
As a black woman, she didn't get it very easy within the royal family, and the newspapers weren't exactly friendly about it either. So, for example, when Kate was pregnant, it was, oh, Kate's cradling her baby bump, it's so lovely. And then when it was Meghan, it's like, why don't Meghan stop touching her belly? Why?
Let people know exactly what's going on, because so many things are kept hidden that we don't know about.
This wouldn't happen if it wasn't for her skin color. If it was Kate Middleton, it wouldn't have gone this far. But she's clever to get out of it while it's still early, because it could have built up into same story as Princess Diana.
Matt, what are you hearing across the UK? Are people upset for Meghan Markle here, or are they still siding with Buckingham Palace?
All right. Well, one thing, first of all, Allison, the show is still going on. You saw this in America last night, but here, the actual debut of the show, even though, of course, we've been hearing about it in the media all day, seeing clips on the internet all day long, really the debut on ITN TV, that was tonight here in Britain. So actually, people are still watching this and still reacting, and there's going to be reactions all throughout the night and into the morning. I think that when you hear people who are siding with Harry and Meghan, a lot of those people, there are many people throughout the country. This country is a little bit divided in the same way that America is. I think there's a lot of feeling, especially among people who don't live in major cities, who live out in rural areas, who live in places that might be a bit whiter, that might be a bit middle class, they don't see this as necessarily something about Meghan and Harry defending themselves against a preying and invasive royal family. They see this as an attack on an institution that is truly ancient and that really is not just part of the national identity, and it very much is part of the national identity, but part of the Constitution, part of the government. And so they see this, they see Meghan Markle and they see Harry's decision to move to the U.S. as something of a betrayal. And for them, it might not matter whether or not they hear from Meghan Markle something that would convince others, especially in urban areas, especially those in the more cosmopolitan elite. Again, these divisions in Britain, they really fall along the same creases that you're seeing in the States. So it's easy to imagine how traditionalists, how more conservative people would go against this formal royal couple. Allison?
Matt, Prime Minister Boris Johnson refusing to comment on Meghan and Harry's allegations. Listen to this.
The best thing I can say is that I've always had the highest admiration for the Queen and the unifying role that she plays in our country and across the Commonwealth. And as for the rest, all other matters to do with the royal family, I've spent a long time now not commenting on royal family matters, and I don't intend to depart from that today.
Johnson isn't the only one dodging questions about the interview here. It's now been nearly 24 hours since it aired here in the U.S. Buckingham Palace, we would presume, has seen the bulk of it. They haven't said anything. Do you expect the royals will respond at some point?
I mean, I think they're all right now huddling, trying to decide how they'll respond, if they'll respond. I'm sure they will respond on some level. But what a politic response from Boris Johnson. And, he has to say that, really. In many ways, he feels, constitutionally obligated to say that. So remember, this all goes back to, this isn't just a question of publicity, of celebrity fodder, of gossip magazines. This also is a part of the Constitution. It's important we remember that we don't just project this kind of Disney fairy tale image. Here in Britain, it's seen, the institution, the firm, the royal family, they're seen a whole lot differently. Allison?
Really amazing stuff. Matt, thank you for being on with us to talk about it tonight. They've been let go, forced to choose between work and family, juggling jobs and educating their kids from home. Women and mothers bearing the brunt of the burden during this pandemic, economically and emotionally. No wonder it's been called a she session. Here's NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Ruhle.
Randy Levine had just started a job ordering doors and windows for a company in South Florida when the pandemic hit.
April came around and they said, I'm sorry, we're going to have to let you go.
And what happened then?
I came home, I applied for unemployment, and I applied for food stamps.
She's been looking for work ever since. It hasn't been easy. Is this the longest you've ever been unemployed?
Yes, absolutely.
What kind of jobs are you looking for?
Well, I used to be, in my younger days, I used to work physical jobs. Now, what I've been doing the last few years, working office work.
Levine is like millions of other women, unemployed and looking for work, struggling in what some are calling a she session, all because of COVID-19.
I do a lot of praying. I think about my kids. They need me.
It's happening in part because many women held jobs in businesses that struggled and even shut down when people stayed home. Restaurants, retailers, hotels.
Many parents may have to choose between their jobs and their families, and that could have an especially big impact on women.
And with schools and childcare centers closed, working moms were 3 times more likely than dads to pick up the extra childcare and housework. In some cases, those moms decided to walk away from work. But you can't really call it a choice. At the start of this year, 10 million women with children were not working, an increase of nearly 1.5 million compared to a year earlier.
It's been difficult. I've tried working from home, but with 2 children at home, and my husband works full-time, it's hard to manage both.
The situation has been even tougher for Black and Latino women, with unemployment rates still almost doubled from a year ago. All told, more women than men have left the workforce entirely, 2.4 million in 1 year. Even after some recovery, the percentage of women working is still only back to levels last seen in 1987.
Women leaving the workforce in these numbers, it's a national emergency, and it demands a national solution.
Vice President Kamala Harris sounding the alarm, pushing to make sure women are not left behind as more people get vaccinated and the economy recovers.
In 1 year, the pandemic has put decades of the progress we've collectively made for women workers at risk.
The administration's $1.9 trillion relief package includes proposals it says will help working women keep working. That includes additional stimulus, more tax credits for each child, and money to invest in more child care. Several celebrities and CEOs are pushing for a Marshall Plan for moms, recalling the U.S. program that rebuilt Europe after World War II. It includes $2,400 in monthly payments to moms in need, along with family leave, childcare, and equal pay.
Any economic recovery plan that this administration is putting forth has to put mothers at the center of it.
But missing work for any length of time can set women back in their careers and their future goals.
I send out resumes, I go on interviews, and by this time I should have had a job already.
What do you worry about most right now?
It's my well-being.
That lost promotion or pay raise or new skill, that's not something easy to recapture. It's already been years of striving for equality in the workforce. And after this year, it could become a lot harder. But the U.S. economy is resilient, and so are women. It's time now to solve this problem together.
My next guest is one of the highest-ranking women ever to work on Wall Street. She's now the CEO of Ellevest, a financial startup she launched 5 years ago to help women invest more, save more, and do more for their money and their careers. Sally Krawcheck, it is so terrific to see you, even just virtually. I can't believe Ellevest is 5 years old. Congratulations.
Oh, I know. It's no longer a toddler. It's growing up into a little kid and growing very, very quickly, I'm happy to tell you.
That is terrific. I'm so excited for you. Listen, we've just been talking about all that women are dealing with during this pandemic. We know they have additional family responsibilities. So many female businesses are centered around industries that have taken a huge hit during the pandemic. I keep saying it's no wonder we're calling this a she session. So tell us more about what you're doing over at Ellevest to help women get through this. And how have you had to change your approach to meet women where they are right now?
Yeah. So look, our entire mission is to get more money in the hands of women because we can't find anything bad that happens when women have more money. It's good for their families, the economy, society, and so on. But as that segment showed us, women have really been knocked back. And so we've taken Ellevest from being an learning company, a coaching company, and very importantly now, a supporting each other company. What we have found is that 90% of women want to buy from women-owned businesses. Women want to support women. And so today we've rolled out the Ellevest Women-Led Collection, which is a cashback and rewards program in which consumers will be rewarded for shopping women-owned businesses. So a real win-win. You do your typical spending, you buy it from a women-owned business, you get money back in your pocket.
I'm a huge fan of cashback shopping, and this is one of the best I've heard of because it's women backing women. I love this. Sally, I have to ask, for the longest time, even after you left Wall Street, you had still made it further up the ladder than most other women. But just a week ago, Jane Fraser took over as the CEO of Citigroup, where you once worked. She is the first woman to run a major U.S. bank. It's kind of awesome, but I also think it's kind of sad that that's where we are in 2021. Why aren't women making it further into the C-suite? And are you encouraged by the change we're starting to see?
Well, first of all, Jane's terrific, and I'm thrilled for her, and I know she's going to do a great job. But I'm not going to be happy till we don't know the names of all the women CEOs. The fact that we can name them all, if you're, sort of in and around Wall Street, tells you there really aren't enough of them. Why haven't they made it? Because inertia breeds inertia, and the groups in charge tend to be the groups that stay in charge. They tend to promote people like themselves. The challenge for us is it's not just, oh gosh, women aren't getting to senior roles. There's an implication to it. Is it any surprise that in an industry in which 86% of financial advisors are men, 90+% of traders are men, 98% of mutual fund dollars are managed by men, 99% of investment dollars are companies owned by men, that men invest so much more than women do, that they build a business for themselves. And so the real issue is not, I wish she had that job. The real issue is if an industry isn't diverse, then it doesn't build products and services for everyone. And women not investing as much as men do, women not having more debt than men do, not getting that help, means that women have only a third the wealth that men have.
With that said, what's your advice for women who might want to get into finance, investing, business, or even start their own business?
Well, and that's why we started Ellevest, to build the company that we want to work at, to build the company to really spend every bit of effort it's got in helping to get more money to women. Spending every piece of research we does is around women, not around the average, but around women. What I tend to tell would-be entrepreneurs, though, is you better make sure you love it, that you are passionate about it, because it's incredibly hard. I've run big businesses and I've run startups. This is much harder. But having the mission to be able to get out and try to bring women together, to help women support women, to help recover from this pandemic, I wouldn't trade anything else.
Before we let you go, some investing advice. There may be women watching this thinking, my gosh, it's been a rough year. I have not done well financially during this pandemic. How can I even think about investing or saving right now? What do I do? What do you say to that woman?
Do it. Because investing, we tend to think of the stock market. We women tend to think it does this. Historically, it's done that. And women, when they invest, are better investors than men because we tend to trade in and out less. We tend to set it and forget it. And so if you're able, if you've got money that you can lock up for 5, 10, 15 years, a little bit of every paycheck, invest in a diversified investment portfolio like what we do at Ellevest, and just a little bit of every paycheck and don't pay attention to it. The other thing I would tell folks to do is if you are a small business owner, a woman-led business, I want you to come over to ellevest.com/women and sign up to be part of our cashback and rewards program. We hope to drive more business to women-led businesses. If you're a woman consumer or any gender, we also invite you to come over and start to shop women-led businesses to help women recover.
All right, you heard it from Sally Krawczyk. Women tend to be better investors. Get in there if you can. Sally, it's great to see you. Congrats on 5 years of Ellevest, and thank you so much for coming on News Now.
Thanks for having me.